now I want to tell you what happened to me next.
What happened to you next? That's it.
I have to tell you about how I met the love of my life. While I was still the president of Junior Hadassah, I used to run from the office of the Palestine Pavilion, which was in the Empire State Building, 34th, and 34th and Broadway. I forgot. Anyhow, the Empire State Building.
We're both Midwesterners now. It doesn't go so easy.
And I would, at my lunch hour, scoot over to the Hadassah building to see what the Junior Hadassah mail was of that day and to do whatever I had to do and be back at the office, because that was my salaried job. In retrospect, I should have paid Weisskull for the opportunity to have that job. But one of these trips from my office to the Hadassah office, I saw two of the Hadassah ladies, the senior Hadassah ladies, Shulamith Schwartz at the time, she had not yet married, Nardi, and Gazella Warburg, who were with some man. I didn't pay attention to who he was. And I saw them coming in the opposite direction. I can't take the time to talk to them now. And I thought, I'll cross the street and then I'll pretend I don't see them. And before I knew it, I was on top of them. Okay. So one of them turned to me and said, now, you know, and I guess they said Maurice Pekarsky, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking about how fast could I go to that office. And no one didn't know each other, but I would do it. Then I rushed over. And that evening, I was to take a very distinguished Jewish educator from Minneapolis who was on his name is Dr. George Gordon and his wife. Dr. Gordon was taking a last trip around the country. I say last trip because he was turning blind and he wanted to see his students who had made good in the Jewish world. And so he went to Cleveland and Detroit and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and New York to have a last look and meet with them. And while he was in New York, I was hosting them, and I took a room for them at the apartment hotel where I was living on 72nd Street. And we had made the appointment to have dinner in Far Rockaway that evening. And we were to meet Dr. Samuel Blumenfield of Chicago, who was on a year's leave from the College of Jewish Studies here to work with the Zionist Youth Commission. Now, I have to go back and say, Maurice Pekarsky, when he met me, and he knew the name, because as president, I was in the press a lot, and as he reported this to me subsequently, so that's Nell Ziff. I didn't think she looked like that. And he thought he was going to find out how to get in touch with me and try to make a date with me while he was visiting in New York. So he could have asked these two ladies. They certainly would have known, but he was too embarrassed. And the reason these ladies were taking Maurice to lunch was because they wanted to pick his brain on how to define general Zionism. You know, labor Zionism had a
specific.
Sure.
Yeah.
The religious Zionism had a specific purpose. But what could we say about general Zionism? They wanted a definition. And so they were taking him to lunch.
To pick
Tried
his
to
brain.
get- So when they broke up their lunch, there was Maurice, and he's still thinking, how can he find out where Nell Ziff is? And he looked in the telephone book, and I was not listed because I was in an apartment hotel, reached through the switchboard. So there he was, frustrated, but he had some time, and he decided that he would go to visit his old friend Sam Blumenfield. Old time's sake, they were good friends in Chicago, and he gets up to Sam Blumenfield's office, and Sam says, why don't you come out to our house in Far Rockaway tonight for dinner? And Maurice pleaded, no, I'm very tired, I just came in this morning, I want to relax tonight. And Blumenfield says to him, oh, you'll relax tomorrow, come on. No, another time I'll come, Sam. And then Sam says, some other people are coming tonight to our place in Far Rockaway. You know George Gordon, Dr. Gordon, don't you? And they're coming, and sure, Maurice knew them, but he wanted to relax. And all the while he's thinking, Sam Blumenfield would know how he could get in touch with me, but he was just too embarrassed to ask that question. But then Sam Blumenfield says, you know who else is coming? You know Nell Ziff, don't you? He had to quickly change his tune, and okay.
What a wonderful story now.
Meanwhile, I'm at the Penn Station with the Gordons at the appointed place and time, waiting for Sam Blumenfield to come and fetch us. And I see a guy coming down the escalator with the Gordons, but I didn't even know they were together. And when they reach us, this guy is still standing with Blumenfield, and Blumenfield, each other, and said, how do you do? And he reminded me that he had just met me.
Did you remember?
No, I didn't. Oh, I'm telling you, I could figure it out. How fast can I get out of this little situation? So that was the beginning of a long-distance courtship that depended on frequent visits to New York. And
is there anything outstanding that you remember about the evening? The first evening that you spent with him?
He took me for a little walk. And he gave me certain tests. He told me about some experiment he was doing somewhere, and meanwhile he was sure testing me too.
What was his background now? What was Maurice's background?
Maurice came from Poland with his parents and two brothers. He was the eldest of the three, and he came after bar mitzvah.
5 came together.
Yep.
It's a lot.
And his father had landed in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he was the principal of the school, the conservative Hebrew school, and the cantor, and that kind of thing.
In the 30s? In the 20s?
I guess so.
If Maurice was bar mitzvah, maybe in the 20s?
So Maurice was bar mitzvah.
Early 30s?
Had to be. So, but he came as an educated Jew. And he quickly went through high school, and he went to a small college in Grand Rapids, and then landed at the University of Michigan, where he got his master's, of all things, in French.
Yeah.
He was going to be a French professor.
Oh.
One of his close friends at the University of Michigan, through Avuka, of which he was president, that was a Zionist youth organization on campus at the time, was Stephen Wise's son, James Waterman Wise. And Jimmy used to go back to New York and tell his father about this wonderful fellow who was the head of Avuka and how much Judaism there was in his background, how great he was, and so forth. And so one time when Maurice came to New York on his vacation, Wise called him up and said, look, Jimmy's always talking about you. I want to meet you. So they made an appointment. And during the end of that first conversation, Dr. Wise said, you don't know it. You think you're going to be a French professor, but you're not. You're going to come to my rabbinic school.
He told him that.
The Jewish Institute of Religion at that time in New York. And Maurice laughed. I mean, it was so unthinkable. He had his heart set on teaching French. And anyhow, he did that a second time. Stephen Weiss kept after him, and that must have been when he was in his third year. And sure enough, before he was in his senior year,
he rethought it.
No, not that he rethought it, but Dr. Weiss sent him a scholarship for the 2 years that he would have to, 3 years, whatever it was, to be in the school. And somehow we just got swept into that. So that's how he became a rabbi, and very close to Stephen Wise. Though he knew he never wanted to be a pulpit rabbi.
He knew that right away.
He knew that right away.
Huh.
Yes, but
did he know what he wanted to be?
well, I suppose he had his eye on Hillel, and his first job out of the rabbinic school was to be the Hillel director at Cornell. And that was a great experience. And then from there he came to Northwestern, where he was
When you met.
when I
I
met.
just want to ask about...
Did he begin the Hillel Foundation at Northwestern? Was he the first Hillel director?
Let me just try to think. No,
About that Evanston community.
there was somebody else. There was somebody else. I'm trying to think who it was, but there was another person before him. And
But I wanted to ask about one other piece of his life. What was the piece in Poland? Is there anything more you want to say about the Jewish upbringing or what it was like for him to be
accepting
raised
that
in Poland?
it was Orthodox, and it was thoroughly educated. Father was in the business, and Maurice turned out to be more Jewishly educated than the other two brothers, but
it was an Jewishly educated family.
Oh yeah, sure. And he learned fast the ways in America.
So you met him, now back to this first wife with the tests.
Skip the courtship part of it. I'll tell you, we had I got pneumonia at some point before we had made any wedding plans, and I just somehow didn't. I had used up all my stored up energy in the days when I lived in New York, running, meetings, and my mother always used to warn me. She used to say, Nell, there will come a time you're using up your storage, and then you won't have it when you need it. And when I got pneumonia, I just couldn't get back. This was while I was with the Reconstructionist, with the SAJ.
Takes a lot of rest to come back.
And then I finally got my strength back, and he was on one of his visits, and we said, you know what? We said to each other, if we got married soon, then when you have your vacation in December, then we could go on a honeymoon trip whenever. So we telephoned, I to my folks and he to his folks, and said, do you think you could pull yourselves together to plan a wedding for 2 weeks from Sunday?
This is wartime too, isn't it? Oh boy.
one of Maurice's brothers was a soldier in the war someplace or other. And it wasn't, it was a statement of fact, not a question. I mean, of course. But it was to be a very small wedding. Sisters and brothers and
In Minneapolis.
nieces and nephews, yes. And we just, the instruction was clean, unashamed.
Small and
Small,
beautiful.
but nice.
Cute, nice. Plain of a shame.
Plain, never shame. And the rest of it we just let do that. And we just said, brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews. And I chose 3 close friends from Minneapolis. One of them was Dr. Gordon and his wife. And Maurice was bringing his closest friends, the couple, Thornton Merriam, who was head of the Department of Religion at Northwestern, and his wife, and the other one was his closest friend, who was the psychologist, Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin and his wife, who were then in Iowa, where he had innovated some project in child study.
Did he meet him at Michigan?
No, met him at Cornell, where he was stationed doing something too at the time. So this month. There were 2 rabbis, 2 conservative rabbis, and I just remember that they said it was going to be professional courtesy, and they wouldn't make speeches at the wedding. And it was very, festive, and lots of music and lots of singing, and the meals. The wedding was at my eldest sister ceremony, and the meal was at my mom's with a table stretched out, through the living room and dining room, and it was just the way Shane, clean over Shane. It was very nice, and I just remembered that there were 6 or 7 cars where everybody piled in and saw us off to the train station, and we went to Florida and had our honeymoon, and it was great. It was great.
I'm just lifted listening to you now. Just
great.
what a wedding and a beginning of a marriage should be.
A life that was total fulfillment for the both of us. It was in the 20 years that we were married, I can't think of how 2 people could have had as much happiness
And delight.
as we had.
Someone once told me, maybe it was you, about how Stephen Wise had something to do with your getting married.
Oh.
Speaking of people who influenced you at different...
Stephen Wise was... I knew Stephen Wise on my own in the days when I was living in New York, and he was on the board of the Palestine Pavilion at the World's Fair, so he was at all the meetings and things. And then I knew him also through Hadassah, because there were all these platforms where, as president, I used to sit up there, and he used to just tease the life out of me because I wasn't married.
That's right. Oh, this is
and sometimes I'd introduce him at the convention as the big community meeting in the evening with hundreds of people there. And I would introduce him, and then he'd get up there and he would say, I don't know what we're going to do about Nell.
in front of all these people?
Where are we going to find a chassid for Nell? He'd embarrass me, no end. So then when Maurice was coming to Northwestern, and by that time you can guess, Maurice had been at his school and very attached, and he considered Maurice his boy. And so he wrote a letter to Rosemary Krensky, who was his cousin, who lived in Glencoe, and he told her that Maurice Pekarsky was coming to Northwestern, and please, Rosemary, look after him and take good care of him, and you know, then he sold this and he sold that and everything, and then he said, and please, Rosemary, see if you can find a collar for him. So this was independent, working on the two of us. And so then when we wrote to him and told him we were getting married, he sent us a telegram. I have it, you know, in my album here, in which he said, Mazel Tov, why the hell didn't I think of it?
That's a wonderful story. I'm really glad you thought of
Yeah,
that.
isn't it interesting that
The strains.
yeah, that's right.
Strange.
From New York with me and Maurice here,